Hello, now we're going to move back into our business stream with another session on delivery. And this is going to be provided by two senior executives from Nikon Sekkei, who are Tadahiko Murao and Jan Henkens, who are respectively the executive officer and senior manager in the global business development department of Nikon Sekkei. And Nikon Sekkei, of course, are known for delivering very, very high quality buildings at the end of the process. They've also taken part in WAPN a number of times with several shortlisted projects, some of which I well remember. And I think what we're going to hear about here is some of the experience, both of the large firm of Nikon Sekkei, which Tadahiko is going to outline, and then some specific projects, which Jan is going to talk about. So could I ask you both to take it away?
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy. So we are very happy to have the opportunity to speak at such a great event. I'm Tadahiko Murao, Nikken Sekkei, Principal and General Manager of Barcelona branch. Firstly, I'll explain what company Nikken is and introduce some of our projects for about 10 minutes. Then Jan Henkens, our Senior Project Manager, will talk about his on-site experience for about 20 minutes. Okay, let's go. So Nikken was founded in 1900. We have a history of 120 years, one of the oldest design firms in the world. Nikken is organized from 3 divisions: planners, architects, and engineers. We can offer so-called one-stop service for the clients. In other words, we take an integrated approach to the project as a professional service. We did over 25,000 projects in more than 50 countries. We have 12 overseas offices. Our headquarters is Tokyo, and we have the office in Osaka, Nagoya, and Fukuoka in Japan. And in the foreign countries, we have the Shanghai, Beijing, Dalian, Seoul, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh, Singapore, Bangkok, and Dubai, Riyadh, Moscow, and in Europe, Barcelona. We have almost 2,000 staff in Nikken, and Nikken Group total. Nikken Group is we have the civil engineering and the housing and the interior and stuff like that. So total Nikken Group is around 3,000 staffs. Now I'll show you some of our projects. This is the Tokyo Tower built in 1958. The height is 333 meters. The Tokyo Tower symbol of the economic recovery from World War II. This is our handwriting drawing. So this is another tower. This is the Tokyo Sky Tree built in 2012. The height is 634 meters. This is a new symbol of the Japanese technology. The shape of the tower is gradually changing from triangle to the circle at the top. This is a night view of the Tokyo Sky Tree. This project is called Queen Square Yokohama. This project is a good example of the TOD project. TOD means Transit Oriented Development Project. The metro station and the big pedestrian mall are connected through the large atrium. Now I'll show you some projects on which we got a category winner at WAF in the past. So this is Sony City. Now we call the NBF Osaki building. So the idea of bioskin was developed at this project. Rainwater is collected in this ceramic louver. And in the daytime, the water is vaporized. This water vaporization makes the building and the surrounding area more cooler, especially in the summertime. This is a detailed photograph of the ceramic louver. This is another category winner project, Cope Kyosai building. There are 4,000 chains on the facade, 8 types of 4,000 chains. The drip tube was attached to the top of each. So this green building, it's by this green building, and this building is cooler than the other building. So for about 3 degrees Celsius cooler than the other building in the summertime. This is a sectional drawing. On the top, there are hot and cooler pipes in the concrete slab. On the floor, supply air is coming from under the floor through the punched carpet, perforated carpet, and also from the punched raised floor. So this is a future project. We got the WAF 10 prize in 2019. The name is W350 project, future project. The challenge is 350 meter super high-rise timber construction. The internal structure is done by pure wood. The outer structure is done by timber and steel hybrid structure. This is a view of the lobby. This will be the cityscape view in the future in Tokyo. Now I'll show you some of the global projects. This is the Future Camp Nou project, the stadium for the FC Barcelona soccer team, football team. Nikken won the international competition in 2016. This project is a refurbishment project. We'll make a big membrane roof onto the existing stadium. The main concept of this project is open to all. There are no facade in this stadium. People can enjoy these open concourse and the open spaces. And also people can enjoy the comfortable sunlight and wind, Mediterranean climate in Barcelona. This project is we call the One Zabir project in Dubai. The Tower A 300 meter and Tower B 240 meter are connected by the glass tube, so-called the link, at 123 meter above from the ground level. This is a view of the Wanza view. And last project is Tadauru Tower in Diado. So that's it from me. And now let me introduce Jan Henkens, our project senior manager. Thank you very much. Okay, Jan-san,
Well, thank you.
please.
Thank you, Murao-san. Thank you, Jeremy. Hello, and thanks for having us. I would like to continue this session actually with sharing a few thoughts actually on quality and delivery, really. This being picked up or inspired by the session's theme being post-planning and the business of architecture. And as my career actually with Nikken coincides almost exactly with a renewed strategic push from about 12, 13 years ago into new markets, and most specifically the Middle East. We spent quite a few soul-searching hours actually with the question that you can just see there on the screen, in terms of namely thinking about what influence do we as architects really have to make the delivery of the final product, namely the building as the final deliverable, really, stand up to the aspirations of quality that we're used to and that clients actually hire us from. We're a bit pampered in Tokyo by contractors or a contracting environment, construction industry that is actually used to delivering very, very high workmanship. But you can't really take this for granted when you take your business overseas. We found over the years it's very easy to actually draw and specify things the way we're used to and send the PDF over to the client. But when it comes to construction, we're at the mercy of the local market, really. So what as architects can we do to actually improve the odds that what gets built is really, really the quality that the client is paying us for? That's a very crucial question, I think, for the business of architecture, really. And I would like to start off with, the obvious one is obviously we're influencing what gets built in the first place by designing or by specifying what it is, maybe BIM models, drawings, and so on and so forth. That's the obvious part. That's our business, really. Then the other end of it is the so-called post-contract, where you may or may not really be involved in site supervision or design supervision. So you may or may not have a leg to stand on in influencing what really gets going on site. But that might literally be not part of your contract, or especially it gets very difficult if you're trying to sort of project your business into new markets overseas outside of your home market. It's really a difficult business proposition to actually move people overseas and really have an influence, a team that can influence construction there. And it's a contractual issue, of course, in the construction contract. So I'd like to suggest a but with a hint at the arrow there in the middle leading from one to the other, which is really what's usually called tender or tender support services, which I found over the years are really often an afterthought in architectural design contracts. Maybe the last bit, the appendix on the architectural design scope is, response to RFIs and clarifications really on the tender before the contractor really takes over. So it's often considered really a hassle, but I would really like to consider that an opportunity. And that's actually, I found this borne out in my career whenever we were involved in tenders and whenever we had the chance to be involved, both pre and post contract. I just found the transition absolutely important in managing risk. So it's not just a business proposition for yourself, it's really a good argument to add value to the client's business actually in managing his risk down. Often architects are not involved in setting up the actual construction contract, but you don't need to be in order to influence the tender. That's what I suggest. Practically, I think I just listed 4 bullet points here in terms of what you can really very specifically and with very simple means do to have an influence there. One would be to influence the criteria by which the contractors get selected and evaluated in the first place. If you have a chance to get into that discussion very early on in parallel to the design, when this is still being done on the client side, usually or with the client project managers, the task there would be to simply make sure that the criteria are set up in such a way that they reward technical capability and quality aspirations as opposed to just selecting cheapest bidder. And I would like to suggest that that can be done and can be influenced even in government procurement setups where everything is about making things, apple to apple comparison and then choose the cheapest bidder. So there's still a lot of influence that architects can have. Then once the pre-qualification or the qualification of contractors is underway, you should, I think, proactively really sit down with these contractors and actually explain to them the design intent and also explain to them which parts of the design are actually difficult. I believe in the UK it's actually a legal requirement that you have to explain deviations from certain standards to the contractor, otherwise he's not bound to them. And while that might go a little far, I think there's a real value for the contractor, but also for the client in ensuring that the contractor really understands what he has to do. Again, the situation that I found time and again in my career is that the contractor sends the bidding team, the commercial team, the guys who knows all about the insurance to these meetings, and that the commercial team takes over on the client side as well, unless the architect really pushes for making sure that there's technical explanations and technical responses that are being discussed really. So that the tender bid or the bidding, the results of the bid really become that much more robust and reliable. That goes the other way. The contractor also has a chance to talk back to you then, and that means you can understand what the contractor's challenges are, and that might be supply chain issues because he finds it difficult to get certain materials that you're specified, or constructability issues, geometrical issues. So you can have an actual conversation, and ideally, depending on the timeline that you have to maybe finalize, say, a contract set, you could actually even take this into account in a final set or suggest to the client that there is an issue there that might actually be worth considering and activate the necessary change control procedures early on, really. And again, all of this adds value, tangible value to the client and to the architect by minimizing the risk of claims in the construction and getting it closer to an actual collaborative setup. And one of the biggest boons actually is, and especially where I do a lot of work for Nikon in the Middle East, is that the construction contract almost by definition forces all the parties into a very antagonistic setup, and that's the complete opposite of what we find in our home market in Japan, where everything is about collaborative problem solving really. And I think there is a direct correlation between the quality of the actual final product and the contract setup. So I like to illustrate this on two particular examples to have a bit of a more specific idea of what we did really. This is Tadao Tower, actually the last project that Murao-san just finished his slides with. This is currently under construction in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh. It's going to be finished next year, so it's a very advanced stage of construction. And we have been privileged to have the opportunity to actually do everything in this building, really, from the architectural design to all this structural and MEP engineering, all the specialties from start to finish, including, very unusual for us actually, full site supervision even on this building in Saudi Arabia. So that's what it looks like probably a year ago, actually. And what we really did learn on this, it was a very steep learning curve on this. We went through a very, very deep pre-qualification projects, actually very early on with the client's project managers, to their credit, visiting 20 construction sites in Saudi Arabia and mostly in the UAE, some 20 contractors, not relying on the documentation they provided, but actually having them show us around active current construction sites and understanding their setup, understanding their management procedures, and understanding how they deal with problems and solving problems. So looking behind the curtain there was really an eye-opener, actually, and really, really helped us on the second item in this list, to write our own specifications. I think, like many other companies, there's a set of standard specifications that are usually being applied. And most architects will know what they say, but hardly understand why they say that. And one of the best experiences from my career, almost in hindsight, I would say that we took the decision of writing a complete specification literally from scratch, including Division 1, the general requirements that really drive the workmanship. So that took a lot of effort, but absorbing all of these things that we learned and all the discussions that we had about quality into this, specifically for the project, was really, really a big driver behind making sure that the quality gets delivered, really. Now, zero compromise is really more about a mindset than anything you can write. And we had the great luck here that we had a client, project managers, and ourselves really all on the table agreeing that there's a zero compromise mindset when it comes to quality and workmanship, really. So it took the contractor a little while to realize that we really wanted everything perfect every time, all the time. And it was a huge effort to actually make sure that nothing gets ever dropped and making sure it gets corrected. But it was in the end worth it. And even the contractor's staff actually picked up on it when they saw that this is a building that every one of them will put on their CVs, and it will be on every portfolio and every homepage as almost a marketing tool for them, for sure, and all the subcontractors even, and the manufacturers. And that really showed in the build quality. The fourth item on the list sounds very simple, but one of the very simple tools we employed in our specifications to make sure that there's an extensive range of benchmark mock-ups to being built, even of some mundane items, and that they get built very, very early on, specifically in the construction, not just as late as possible as they usually get done. It's because the main purpose of those was not actually to show the client around, but to show the contractor staff around and use these benchmarks as training tools to get the workmanship just right, because this is a high-rise building, so there's a lot of repetitive parts on the standard floor. So if you can make sure that you flush out all the workmanship issues on the mock-up, you don't have to repeat them all over again on every floor. And that took a lot of time to approve the mock-ups at first. I think we spent a year on the typical floor toilet mock-up, but I think it prevented a vast amount of issues recurring then on every floor. So I think in hindsight, I think we feel very much confirmed in that sense. This is another building that I looked after basically concurrently to the Stadawul Tower for a while. Menara Astra is currently one of the highest buildings in Jakarta in Indonesia. It was finished in 2017. This is what it looks like. It's finished on cost and on schedule, actually, in fact, slightly faster than scheduled. And I think that's a testament also to the management that we were able to implement together with the client. On this building, we've only done the architecture, really, and structure and everything was carried out independently. There was a lot of coordination again with other actors, really. In this case, the client was willing to take a bit more commercial risk and went for a direct negotiated tender route, which gave us the opportunity, also forced us to redo our entire workflows, but gave us the opportunity to actually drip feed information and start discussions with the contractor while we're actually finalizing our final design. So there's no tender document as such. So there's a trade-off business-wise between the additional hassle of having to go through these discussions, but then we saved the stage for tender document effectively. And due to having the chance of having these discussions with the contractor, we could actually really tackle a lot of almost pre-approvals on tricky or high volume, high value materials as part of this discussion. It doesn't mean we settled on a particular material, but we could actually visit manufacturers and visit the contractor's supply chain, or especially on tricky items like natural stone, of which there's quite a lot in this building, which is traditionally very tricky to procure and get the quality right of. And that was a big boost, again, saving a lot of time, a lot of hassle later on during the construction. And again, we found ourselves confirmed in thinking that the collaborative approach between the client or the client project managers, the architects, and the contractors regarding what the contract conditions actually say is really a very, very critical essence towards delivering real quality. So in a nutshell, that's it. And I would be really looking forward to see what other comments Jerry might have or what questions the audience might throw up in that regard. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both, Tadahiko and Jan, for an excellent description, both of the sort of overview of what Nikon Sekkei is and what it can do, and also getting a little bit into the mechanics of how you deliver projects. And I wonder if I can ask you both for a quick comment first on how you manage the relationship between the designers in your firm and the managers, the project managers, specifically in your firm, because in a previous session on delivery, that relationship was highlighted as something which can be problematic, but clearly there are ways of managing it effectively. I wonder if you can say something about how you do it.
I think it's a case by case basis of the chief architect and the PM being paired on big complex projects, and it depends on personalities, and everybody needs to be professional to make it work. But in principle, I think it helps to have a clear idea or a clear mindset in saying we're not a project management company, we're a design company. So the chief designer still has the primacy over what gets designed, but the project manager is at his site, clear a path for him, also make sure the paper trail is put in place, but also has the authority and the characteristics necessary to maybe ping the chief architect sometimes and saying, look, are you really sure this is what we should be doing? So there's always this sort of creative, this sounding issues out against each other when it is necessary. It also helps to have this double head towards the client. Sometimes you can almost play good cop and bad cop sometimes, which really helps to flush out issues and advance discussions the way they need to go without taking it too far sometimes.
Tadahiko, do you have thoughts on this as well?
Yes, and before we go on to the project, and the designer and the project manager is selected, and we communicate very well. And then, so when we were going to go to the client, we go to the client together and communicate very well, and share the idea together. So that's a Nikken style, I think.
So it is a form of collaboration then, that you have to set up the right relationships in order to be able to collaborate with the internal members of the team, but also the client. And then, as you were saying, I think it's very strikingly on the project in Indonesia that you were working with the contractor at quite an early stage. And I think a lot of architects would be envious of that sort of setup where you don't have to deliver an enormous amount of work for the tender documentation, which is then going to be revised anyway, that you have the contractor on board, and therefore you can work out from an earlier stage more collaboratively how to solve some of these problems.
Yeah, I think that was really a good experience, and I think that's why I come back to this tender process actually being a bit of my impression is a bit of an underappreciated stage, and it's often neglected in business terms because unless it's a defined part of your scope, it happens by definition at the end of the design when we've spent all the man hours. Nobody really wants to go and then tour another couple of contractor site and have all of the discussion when the architects are needed back at home to actually finalize the documentation. So that's another place where it actually helps to have a separate sort of project manager or a separate technical person to go through that and absorb that input and feed it back into the design workflow.
Yeah, and I think, Jan, one of the slides you showed, the sort of pre-qualification criteria for the tender process is, again, almost a skeletal sort of framework for getting the whole complex business of delivering the building on site as right as possible. The explanation of the design intent to the contractor, the understanding, as you say, of the challenges the contractor might face in building that design, whether they're to do with the supply chain or to do with the geometrical and constructional issues, and then feeding back into the design. It's treating the contractor like a grown-up around the table, which all too often, certainly in the United Kingdom, the contractor is, likes to think they're in charge of everything, and therefore gets treated as if they're at the sort of general dog's body or the servant who has to do what generally it's he is told to do.
Yes, that's very much something I would say is reflected in my experience. And one of the biggest eye openers on that pre-qualification tour through the Middle East for me was there's a gap between who has the best documentation and who's really doing the best work on site. It's not the same contractors necessarily. We found a couple of tier 2 contractors who were not really putting that much effort into the documentation, but they were really, really genuinely doing a good job on site, really. And that's what you ultimately want to look at. And likewise, it was also very educational to understand. Everybody assumes the biggest contractors can do anything, but that's not necessarily the case if you understand how they're doing it and who they're subcontracting it to, and whether that's a long-standing relationship or a case-by-case thing. That again enables you to judge those risks much more accurately on behalf of the client. So that's why I keep saying this is not just a hassle; it enables you to actually add value to the client. And if you're able to phrase it or frame it in this sort of discussion to say we're helping to drive down your risk, I think a lot of clients will be willing to actually look at that a little bit differently.
Yes, I think your point is very well well made, that the looking at the tender process as an opportunity rather than as this terrible hurdle that has to be overcome is well worth bearing in mind here. But another thing that strikes me, and perhaps Tadahiko, you could comment on this, is in Japan, the big contracting firms still have the contracting skills. They may subcontract to some extent, but they still know how to source them. They still know how they all fit together. And sadly, in the UK, the biggest contractors have become, managers of cash flow, and they just see it in terms of how much they have to dole out to each individual supplier or subcontractor, which of course they do with great reluctance because they've won the work through a competitive tender and probably have a tiny profit margin. But I guess in Japan it's a bit different, and maybe you could say something about how the big contractors work in Japan.
Yes, so the construction in Japan, the construction company has a lot of knowledge and technology. So sometimes before we go into the design development stage, and we will collaborate together to develop what is most important and valuable for the client, so together. So that's the client decision. But sometimes if we would do the big stadium or big highlights project, then sometimes we collaborate together the design development stage, and so there are very flexible way we can accommodate what client want and what the project the situation is.
And of course, being able to define those goals with the client at an early stage, and then with the design team, whether it's in-house, whether you have external consultants, and ideally as well with the contractor. But I wonder if I might float an idea here, which is slightly a counterintuitive one, but it seems to be the implication of what you're saying, which is that somehow the culture of design is international, that the architects and the way architecture works across the world is increasingly compatible, whether it's in Japan, whether it's in Spain, whether it's in the Middle East or Barcelona or Indonesia. And what changes, the really big differences that have to be managed, are in the sort of local contracting methods and traditions, and I suppose even the culture of how contractors work is quite different. I mean, maybe in some countries they're much better at using steel than concrete, and vice versa. So I wonder if you can comment on that, whether it's true that design is perhaps more of an international practice, where contracting is always specific to the particular place where you're working.
Okay.
I think that's entirely true, because I mean it's the construction site by definition is local. No matter where you do the design, you could do the design wherever you want, but the site is by definition local. So you could even bring an international contractor from the neighboring countries in a joint venture format. But again, you have to import the skills by importing people if necessary. And then you run into everything from immigration through customs and materials, and whether the VAT applies of this country or this country, and how does a contractor make sure to cover all of his risks when he has to do this in 3 months for an entire building at the tender stage. So I think we just need to, like you said, treat contractors as grown-ups, and also appreciate that they're all just he's trying to cover his risk, which is entirely valid. And if you can actually address some of these, understand what these risks are, at this stage nobody's yet locked into this contractual position, so you can still address this at an early stage without, before people get down into their trenches, And it also depends a bit on how much risk or what's the client's position towards all of this. But again, that's if you take the chance to actually explain the value to them, then I think most clients will be very much willing to listen to it.
And Tadahiko, I think you had something to say about this subject as well.
Okay, so I'm not working for the Camp Nou Stadium in Spain. This is my first time to design in Spain. But I'm very surprised that the concept of the architectural law or the technology or idea of something like waterproofing and evacuation, it's the different is slightly different. However, the main concept is almost same. So I think the world is almost same, not perfect same, complete same, but almost same. So if you have the certain the idea, concrete idea, then you can use your idea and knowledge to any country. I believe that's my experience.
Yes, that's a very interesting perception on this, and it relates to, I think, what will have to be the final topic, I'm afraid, because we're coming to the end of the time we have, and it's about how you can integrate research into design, because I well remember the 350-meter high timber frame tower from last year. And that, I guess, is largely a research project or draws on research that you're doing. And I wonder if you can say a bit about how research feeds both your design and your delivery capabilities within Nikken Sekkei.
So about W350, the client is timber wooden company called Sumitomo Ringyo, and that the client would like to use more timber for the Japanese city. So that's why they have the research center, and the Nikken and the Sumitomo Forest Company collaborate together and investigate together. So about the W350, the case that we collaborate together, and sometimes we have the research company, Nikken Research Company. So sometimes we work internally with our own research company.
Sure.
Yan-san, do you have any idea? Other thing?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much. Sometimes, if you're lucky, like in this W350, that a company pays you to do something experimental, which is almost like a research grant, if you will. And sometimes you just have to define your own internal sort of task force with a specific goal and allocate some money to it to get some specific information that the company feels is just valuable enough to have, or just try something out. And maybe you find a way to do it as an internal competition or something to get some value other than just the information as the result, some fun out of it maybe. And unfortunately, in terms of business, it's very, very difficult to do anything on an actual project budget, because it's extremely difficult to justify this sort of man hours involved in this part of your fees, where everybody's just trying to just go as low as possible sometimes.
Yes, I think one of the things that interests me about research, and I think, Jan, your point is well made, that it's very difficult to justify doing research on a normal project budget, particularly where you're bidding competitively for the work. But the fact that you have this accumulated experience in a firm that goes back 120 years, and also accumulated experience of working in different parts of the world, gives enormous authority to what you do. And the fact that you are open to discussing with the client, not just how you get the best possible delivery, but also how you can manage risk. What risk can you take, and what reward would you hope to obtain from getting that risk? Which, of course, is an enormously complicated equation, which we've discussed in this business stream in other sessions, particularly around the issue of professional indemnity insurance. But I think that what we've seen from your presentation is how the embodied skill of a long-standing and very large firm with a multinational experience can bring real benefits to the client through ensuring the highest possible quality of design. So thank you very much.